videos out. But maybe you'd like to hear from me. I am originally the designer of dTao. Now it's maintained by a number of people, but I think I understand it more than anybody. And specifically, I understand the concepts, the mechanism, and the justification for each aspect of that mechanism. And so I can explain why things are the way they are. So like, I think that those are two of the most pertinent things to talk about on this call in the community, but we can open up the stage to talk about everything else from root weight to Subnet deregistrations. This is also a concept that people are really interested in. People have a lot of opinions on it. There's a lot of text being generated in the Church of Rao Discord. There's a lot of text being generated inside the Rao channel. I mean, I read everyone's comments. I just simply get too many comments in the Discord at this point to respond to all of them. So this would be the great forum for us to actually just go through all of these concerns and talk about what they mean. Like, what does it even mean, subnet deregistration? What could that technically mean for people? What does it mean for the project? Why would we do that in the first place? And I'll try to pen all of that together in sort of a cohesive story. And then if we have time at the end, I'll talk about Aphine. We turned on the emission today. I think it's pretty exciting what's going on in that subnet. It's something that I think we need to build on Bittensor, and I'm excited to push that to that myself. Great. Okay. Well, let's talk about burns. And I think ultimately it's probably good if I just talk at length about what exactly that means. So when we launched dTao, before we launched dTao, we knew that we needed to change the way in which Bittensor organized its emission schedule. And I've told this story a number of times. We built the root network because ultimately as a placeholder for the way in which we would select teams. And in the first 2 or so months, it became very clear to people that were paying attention that this was not going to be a long-term solution to the way in which Bittensor ran. It just simply was not incentive compatible, which means that it did not force participants to think clearly about the truth and act upon the truth. Within 2 or 3 months, we already had teams that were validators that were voting for their subnets, and you really couldn't convince or really even capture them you couldn't build on-chain mechanisms to break out those individuals. People just, they buy their own bag. People buy their own bullshit. And it's really hard to break people away from their ideas, especially when there's no downside. So we knew that was going to come. It was going to come 2 months in, and so that's when we started talking about dTao. There was a lot of pushback on it, and ultimately people were really scared about a lot of things. Like, the main one was like, is there going to be a safe way to stake? Funny now, right? That idea, because the community has totally changed its opinion about this concept of like safe staking. It used to be the main topic for dTao. It was like, there must be a safe staking option. And now people are saying, screw root. We hate root because of the safe staking option. But ultimately, originally that was implemented because of pushback on the idea. It's okay. I think it's good that we have that. So the root network, ultimately, it destroyed itself in about, it took about a year, I would say about a year before it was really bad, a year and a half, just before dTao. It was really on the rocks, and we knew it was because it wasn't incentive compatible, and people were beginning to do insider deals and things called rake backs, and Bittensor would have run off a cliff if we had not launched dTao. So that we knew we needed a way of organizing the emission schedule for Bittensor. And in order to do that properly, we wanted to align participants to think clearly about what is successful, what will be successful for Bittensor. And what does that mean ultimately? What does that mean to be successful for Bittensor? I think that the most important thing will be that it actually ultimately it drives value to the token. It brings income for Tau. Price is a really good signal for that, but it's not the only signal that can be used, and it's a heuristic for the real thing. So we built dTao to force the market to be intelligent about prices. One way that we did that because we knew that subnet owners had a lot of control over their subnets. We knew that they would be able to constrain the emission. We knew that they would attempt to do Ponzi's. We knew that they would send the emission to their own keys, and it would be hard to govern 128 subnets. 32 was way too much. 64 was completely unbearable for validators. 128 is unthinkably difficult to manage and monitor. So the mechanism itself needed to be able to force these teams that were going to try to exploit us. We needed to force them to lose money in that exploitation. This is where we developed the concept of root cell pressure, the auto cell pressure. And our goal here was, initially, when the subnet is young, you can't just pump your price up without there being a shit test, so to speak, which is the cell pressure from root in this allocation phase that lasts about a year. I was on the call today with Ken, and we were talking about root cell pressure. And the thing that I said to him was, I was like, look, if your subnet is less than a year old, am I still coming through? Can people still hear me? Can I get a thumbs up? Can I get a thumbs up? Am I still coming through? Yeah, okay, cool. If your subnet is less than a year old, you're still in an allocation phase. We're still distributing your token in a way that is fair. And so what we're looking at right now is not even really the original market. We're in some sense, you're looking at an ICO, a long drawn out ICO process for the token. When root prop gets down to 5% and lower, which is going to happen next year, that's when we really are seeing these markets in the flesh. The last 6 months of dTao has been, painful for some people, because I think there's been excessive exuberance. There's been a lot of excitement in a low liquidity regime about the prices, but these are not functioning markets yet. They're not liquid yet. They're not mature yet. And this is why I caution people to be very careful about the way they distributed their tokens. So anyways, where I'm going with this is that we needed to have root pressure. Why did we need to have root pressure? Because we knew that we could not fully control the subnets. We could not manage 32. We couldn't manage 64. We couldn't possibly manage 128, nor can we now. People are using the burn mechanism right now. The reason teams are using the burn mechanism right now is because they believe that it is the most effective way for them to protect the equity, you might say, the token ownership of their subnets. They're not ready to distribute this amount of gas into the chamber. And subnet owners are going to be able to do this. And what I'm trying to say is that we cannot actually stop them. So we could attempt to implement mechanisms to stop minor burns, but it would be a fool's errand. We'd be playing whack-a-mole. And is it even something we want? Don't we want to have subnets figuring out the token economics that drive the highest prices for their tokens, and ultimately the most demand to be participating in dTao? I think that is of higher importance. It is true, though, that if everyone burns, Bittensor failed. And so it is sort of like a shit test to the fact that we need to be building mechanisms that either have long-term speculative value, like something like Templar that doesn't have revenue, but can have an immense amount of revenue, or more classic or clear pure play commodity systems where we're looking at revenue initially, right? So Celium, I think, is a good example. Like they posted today that they're revenue positive. I think that's a big deal. So this is my perspective. So on one side, I would say that minor burns, we want to help the teams actually build functioning economies. Tao itself has a consistent and static emission schedule. But on the other side of dTao, the subnet teams are going to try and change their economics in order to play this game. And I'm in favor of letting the incentives play out here. If it doesn't work for a subnet team to burn emissions because miners don't want to contribute there, I'm in favor of that. I think that we should allow that type of freedom on that side. So there's the philosophical argument for letting teams pick what they want to do in order to make their economies functioning. And then there's also the other argument, which is that we cannot stop them. If we implement, and we've attempted to implement a number of times, sort of constraints, like if you burn some amount of a miner emission, we will cut your owner proportion, or we will cut validator proportion in proportion to the amount of miner emission that you've burned. If we try to implement those things, teams can simply circumvent it. So what happens is we end up playing whack-a-mole, and teams that cheat just cheat better than those that are playing the game. And we end up punishing the people that are trying to be quote unquote good, and actually privileging those that are quote unquote cheating. It doesn't suit Bittensor to play that type of game. And we've learned many times over the history of Bittensor to lean into understanding the incentives of subnets. Actually, we leaned into the understanding the incentives of miners. And that's what's turned us into a really well-functioning, well-oiled machine. 2 or 3 years ago, we used to think people should only have one UID on a subnet. The miners should not, quote unquote, exploit. They shouldn't follow their incentives. And we learned that actually going with the incentives, understanding that you need to build incentive compatible systems, is what makes subnets today as competitive as they are, whereas they were not that way in the past. It was actually us leaning into letting individuals play the incentive landscape. In this case, it's dTao, the way that they want to play, that made us really well functioning and really successful as a subnet as a protocol at the subnet level, at the miner level. I think that in the next 6-8 months, we're going to see that level of complexity and innovation in dTao, and we're already seeing it. So much competition at the subnet level. I tweeted today a message from Distributed about how playing the subnet game is so difficult. I'm sorry, but that's good for Bittensor. And it's good that we're seeing these teams really compete to get the type of attention that they need. And this is what pushes Bittensor along. So from my perspective, dynamic tau is working. It's working really well. The prices were somewhat up and down. They went to 2.6. They're going to come down to 1. They'll go back up again. We're probably going to float around a sum of prices of 1 in the near future. That's good. When we were building dynamic tau, and for those that were there listening to our the way that we talked about it, the early implementations details that we had, there was an idea to even make the sum of the prices summing to 1 an invariant in the design. We said, hey, look, we're going to force the sum of the prices to be equal 1. We decided not to do that. We said, let's let it float. But it was always an intention to try to keep the prices early on somewhat tethered and realistically related to the price of tau, and related as a totality to summing to a single tau. So we're kind of exactly where we thought we would be. This last 6 months has been this allocation phase. It's kind of scary. People are learning this thing, but we're understanding a new market mechanism. We built a completely new type of capitalism here. We built capitalism right into the structure of a community. And I don't think that's ever been done before. We're like a mega corporation with a market driven into it. Where is that in the world? It doesn't exist. We have built the first one ever. The fact that it did not explode on initiation is incredible. The fact that we're still just maybe 1 or 2 multiples away from the high, that's fine. And it's something to note for those that have been a little bit concerned with the price depreciation, the red days. I understand it's very stressful for me also to get the feedback from people saying that it's broken when the price goes down. It's not broken when the prices go down, and when the prices go down, they actually are building opportunity to go back up. But people that are holding alpha tokens, they're making incredible yield. And if you do the mathematics, anybody who's just buying through the year, unless you bought it in some insane, or if you stake into these subnets insane values, if you hold them for the year, you're fine, right? So we hope that we are incentivizing people to play the long game here. We don't want people to do short-term trading. We want people to value invest and think deeply about these technologies and where they want to put their stake. And from me, we built it so that was the successful strategy. That's why personally I've allocated over 100,000 tau into dTao, because I want to participate in this game, and I know that long term it's something that will be good for Bittensor, and I want to be on that side. I want to be on the exciting side of what's going on Bittensor. So I'm not like, if you're over here with me, don't worry, we are building the future over here. So yeah, so miner burns. Wow, a bit of a rant there, but I want to just pin it, the conversation. We're talking about miner burns. We're talking about dTao. I don't want to talk about the mechanism for the price stabilization just yet. I want to see if people want to come up on stage and speak with me about some of those concepts. What came to your mind? Did you have any concerns? Are you triggered by that? I can hear. It'd be awesome for people to come up on stage. So if you want to, put your hands up, and we can just bring you up. Otherwise, I can maybe switch focus here and talk about a little bit about the technicals of dTao, and also the change that we made just yesterday, or was it the day before? So the change we made wasn't actually a change. So people that were following the upgrade that we did, we called it a hot fix. It was a hot fix, but I would say it was more of a reversion, a restitution to an original design of dynamic tau that had been removed when we introduced V3 pools. So the last couple months have been from the development side of OTF. We've been pushing to get best in class staking and trading utilities on the chain. So getting V3 pools was a massive thing. Very difficult technology to work with, but it allows people to add liquidity and actually make this network and this function like a proper exchange, something like Hyperliquid for AI. We implemented V3 pools, and V3 pools are quite unique. They don't have the same mathematics that V1 pools have, where there's a clear relationship between the reserves and the price. So when we implemented V3 pools accidentally, the developers didn't realize that they were pulling out an important aspect of dTao, which was that when the subnet alpha prices dropped below their emission, we actually trimmed the amount of alpha injected per block, which is the liquidity injection for dTao. And this actually acts as a buffer, or like a dampening aspect to price reversal, and makes the chain actually act as adding liquidity back to the emission. So it slows down price drops and ensures that over time, the sum of the prices in dTao sum to 1, at least 1. We talked about this early on in dTao, but we never hit it until now, which is exciting. I'm actually quite excited that we're hitting this wall, because this is where we're actually understanding how the mechanism works. The last 6 months have been sort of training wheels on. Now we're working with the way that dTao was supposed to work, which is when you're above 1, this is like heyday, and tau is being paid for the fact that and this is where root prop is sort of positive. What root is getting paid for the fact that this is a great ecosystem to build on. But when prices drop too far, the chain intervenes and helps pull them back up. So this is what we restituted 2 days ago. And I think it's important for people to understand, because you can see that this actually makes the subnet tokens much more investable from my perspective, because there's some guarantees from the chain itself. So yeah, so I mean, like we got Dave and Distribute on the stage. If you guys want to pop in, you're welcome to.
Hey, sure. One question that I had, Jake, for you is just how are you guys kind of tracking or thinking about like participation rates in dTao? Do you think that, especially around like, we'll look at like the top 100 accounts, there really aren't a lot of people, participating of those top 100. And reserve over injected kind of keeps trending down. Like how do you sort of think about, are we getting enough people participating sort of in the mechanism of dTao yet?
Yeah, well, I'm interested in the effects. When we started out with dTao, the goal was a way that we could organize the capital of the network through markets. It's like, how can we organize the flow of emission of Tau inside of a chain without having centralized authorities effectively? How do we do it without validators and all of the problems in thereof? When I think about what it is that I want to see, is I want to see a mechanism that sorts and promotes the subnets on a day-to-day basis. Much more, there's liquidity in the, like, let's say, Tau market cap of Bittensor's internal market. And I don't think that's slowed down at all. I think that we're still seeing that. Like, I think that teams that are, successfully building here feel like they can move up the ladder, right? So Ridge is a good example. It's just been a straight shot from like 100th position to now in 15th, right? So like that's what we hope to see, and that's exactly what we do see. So okay, but your question was more about like volume, right? Your question was about participation and people participating in this market. And I think that what we're seeing right now is sort of like a little bit of fear from investors, right? Like people are scared. The prices have dropped. People are a little afraid. Volume is dropping, right? Thankfully, Bittensor is injecting an immense amount of liquidity in this market. So that even without participation, there's tons of liquidity. Something like Shoots has like 45% as much liquidity as their market cap. Unheard of in most DeFi protocols, right? So we can actually sustain ourselves with very little participation, but that's not what we want, right? What we're seeing right now is a lot of fear, right? People are like, oh my God, the price went down. What does that mean? How does this work, right? It's going to take time before people feel, comfortable in this design, in this mechanism, to understand how the yields work and how the prices work and how, dTao works itself. We're asking a lot in a short period of time for people to be super confident that we'll have the type of liquidity that you would see across, other markets. But yeah, so I think that we're in a bit of a lull. Ultimately, we're in a bit of a lull in terms of volume. But over time, as people understand the mechanism, I believe that will come back, and we'll ultimately see the protocol continue to thrive.
Okay, so I want to just talk a bit about maybe taking us back to the burn, but it's one of the most loaded topics I've seen, and it just shows like how no one's listening to each other. I think that's the biggest problem. No one's listening to each other because, first of all, we start with miners. Yeah, miners inherently think subnet owners are terrible. And the reason for the burn is because they don't care about their subnet. And they just want to be greedy and profitable. Now, us subnet owners, we hear it and we're like, fuck you guys. Like, you guys do not understand, what it takes, which is all right. But you see, I was getting very I was actually like depressed last week because I kept thinking like, why would the miners listen to what I'm saying? Because it makes sense. These guys don't care about Bittensor. Then I realized like, dude, it's a lot of hubris here. Because okay, maybe I think I'm doing something right here, but we're not designing it's a permissionless system. We're not designing a system so that everyone like distributed tensor, everyone that thinks is doing like distributed tensor is doing. No, it has to be permissionless. So whatever rules or wherever we sits here, it's not that we can't assume, even like when we build subnets, we can't assume benevolence. We need to follow the incentives. And the truth is, on the subnet owner side, the guys are fucking around. There's people that have never run code, and and I've done terrible things to miners. So I do actually understand why, because I was so pissed off last week. Like, I was like, these guys are not listening. So it's not necessarily that they're not listening, but it's such a bigger system. And, one or two subnets doing it right doesn't still mean, it's an acceptable outcome. Yeah. So, that's one of my biggest takeaways. Like, let's just listen to each other more. Because one of my arguments here, so we got emissions on Templar. And it wasn't actually us, it was the miners here. So I thought it was cool. But one thing I realized today as I was looking at Templar, but also going through other channels here, is that as subnets evolve and they become like, more sophisticated in their operations, so are the miners. It just fucking hit me today that so are the miners. Like, not everyone is a basement miner. Some of these people have companies. Some of these people have put together resources, to mine. Now, I'm not saying it's not overpaid. And I'm not saying that it's not whether burns should exist or not. Yeah, it's about just listening to each other and trying to be, trying to be an empath. Like, seeing stuff from other people's view. Because all I thought is that, your GPU costs 200, so let's give you $100 an hour more. But it's not that. So let's just listen to each other. And based on that, like, Templar will probably still burn, but the math is going to be different because my argument for whatever is, I'm trying to build a company, but it's very selfish, because there's probably people there. They're probably so I just noticed that all of a sudden we barely have solo miners on Templar anymore. I mean, it's probably just buddy, but if we want both sides to be able to grow, to able to grow together, to keep creating this awesome goods, then we need that kind of view. Yeah, that was my monologue.
So Bittensor subnets, whether or not you like it or not, are controlled by stake ownership. By the end of the year, the stake ownership from Root will be very little. Miners that have chosen to participate in the network over that year will have massive amounts of control of these subnets and can choose whether or not burning will occur. There's no other way to stop, truly cryptographically stop burns on subnets other than grassroots movements by miners with stake. If you don't have stake, you unfortunately, in a cryptographic system, in a proof of stake system, you don't have weight. There's no other way to measure it. There's no, like, we can measure proof of work through proof of stake, but ultimately it's downstream. It's downstream from the representation of stake. So what we're doing internally right now is thinking about ways in which we can make the governance of subnets more let's say liquid, or allow for more shareholder, let's quote unquote shareholder voting. Because right now there's a bit of apathy and people are sort of going to the protocol to say, hey, like, we need to change the protocol to stop miner burns, but that's not the way that you can stop it. The way to stop it is to run a validator and to not point towards the burn key. And in order to do that, you need to gather stake. And that's where this problem is solved. There's nothing that can be done on the chain side to stop owners. If the validators choose to run the code, then that code is what determines the distribution of emission. And we can make the burn key non-existent, but it doesn't matter because people will simply create other burn keys and the problem just persists. So, when approaching this problem, my philosophy has always been, like, if you can't solve a problem, don't try. There's no reason to. The real solution here is, if miners are concerned about this topic and they actually do in fact hold these tokens and participate in these economies, they can participate and the best way they can participate is actually by gathering stake. Make a validator, right? Gather stake from the other miners that have been here that don't want burn to occur. That's the way these subnets work. Okay, so there's that aspect, and then there's also, when we first launched dTao, we were told people were very explicit about the fact that they didn't want to have more liquid, malleable governance at first because we thought it would add too much complexity, which is a fair point. But our goals for the control of subnets after 1 year is that they will be controlled in a more liquid governance style. At which point, it would be possible for people to, again, vote and come up with ways of actually stopping burning. But everything is going to be based on how much stake you have at the end of the day. There's nothing that the protocol can do to change that quality. We cannot measure social consensus. People can come into the Discord and scream all they want. It does not change. There is no way of measuring who you are. How many Discord accounts do you have, right? If we cannot measure that, we cannot use it as feedback for determining whether or not someone should be burning or not. I think that at this point, the teams that are burning miner emissions are doing it to protect token holders, and those token holders are not screaming. So this, or perhaps they are, and if they are, there's ways around that, right? So this is where the kind of problem is solved. Mark, you're up on stage.
Oh, sorry about that. I didn't realize you're going to surprise pull me up. So a couple things real quick. First of all, on the topic of miner burn, I think you're absolutely right that I don't think the chain should constrain the miners in any way. When I first heard this controversy kind of light up, it never even occurred to me to think that the debate should be around should the chain constrain in some new way. It was always in my mind, should the miners do this or not? And if they do it, how should they set expectations? Should they make promises? My fear was that the miners would invest in a lot of equipment and then get burned by the subnet owner. So the subnet owner has to establish some sort of trust, obviously, and make some representations which they stick to and adhere to. But it never occurred to me that the chain should be like altered to stop miners from running their stop subnet owners from running their subnet in any way that they see fit. Now, Second topic on dTao. Look, I want to be a value investor as well, just like you are, Const. That's sort of where my heart is. I don't want to be day trading. I think that's bad ultimately. And frankly, I just don't want to do it. A lot of people here know that I'm in the middle of putting together a hedge fund for Bittensor. And, frankly, we want to make some bets and stick with them for years, hopefully. So that's what I want to do. And that's what I'm going to do. But I think right now for a lot of people, there's no new money coming in really into the subnets, into dTao. And part of the reason why I think a lot of the money is not moving out of root is, people are watching the chain dump on them, dilution wise, at least in their brains. You're calling it building liquidity, which it is. I think it's kind of both things at once, fairly stated. But it's hard to know like how much the chain is quote unquote dumping on me or diluting me. I sort of ran some numbers when dTao first launched, and my numbers said that it was basically about 70% a month dilution. That new money coming into the ecosystem or that subnet would have to offset the dilution. I think that number is now closer to 25% or so. Do you know roughly what that number is? I think it's like 20 or 25%. Is that correct?
So for every alpha token that is minted, which is 1 per block, 18% goes to the owner, 41% goes to the miners, which then a proportion is burned. Previous conversation.
Yeah.
And 41% goes to validators. Of the 41% that goes to validators, so 0.41 of that one token, the root proportion, which is shown on Tao app and also Tao stats, which for most subnets is around 35%. That proportion is auto sold and goes to root, right? So that's 30. So it's like, let's say right now, currently on shoots 33%, right? So it's like 16.5%. 16.5%. And this decreases exponentially over time, right? So it drops over the year, right? So by the end of the year, it's like 10%. So it becomes negligible over time for subnets, eventually becoming not much at all. And yes, and so the reason why, so I'll talk a little bit about root prop because it's a super important concept in dTao. And it was a necessity for a couple of reasons. So one of the reasons was that we needed a way of stopping the token prices from going to basically infinity and initially in dTao in a super low liquidity environment. And we like, if you look at the prices initially in dTao, like a lot of them go crazy, right? And that's irrespective of the root sell pressure, the prices go crazy. And when they're at 100%, right? People still pump these prices up to infinity because it's possible. With one Tao, you can take it to infinity. So we didn't want that because we knew that we would be absolutely fooling investors or people that want to participate in dTao at buying insane prices. So like harkening back to what I said at the beginning of the call, like if you're somebody that is invested in dTao almost at any price and you hold it for the year, you're in the green, right? So for that to me is a sign that we picked a good number to keep people from being able to fool investors via price appreciation that was not legitimate. Now, after this allocation phase, in the next 6 to 8 months to 10 months, that's when we're going to really start to see the market in action because there's a lot of liquidity. So part of the value here of root prop was to stop unbelievable price appreciation with the amount of Tao and root mixed with an incredibly a little bit of alpha, and we need to smooth that process over. Well, we're still in that process, right? Think about what's going on, right? We're talking about billions of dollars being injected into hyper low liquidity altcoins. So that was one of the values of root prop, and it's important to note that it's decreasing over time. The second point was we chose as the heuristic for the allocation of Tao to be the price. Price is a pretty good heuristic. It's not the perfect heuristic for value. It's a pretty good one. We tried a variety of different things. We thought about the amount of Tao in the pool, but a lot of these heuristics had problems. Like they would really privilege early teams over later teams and make it kind of impossible to come into the system. Others were totally gameable. Price is an understandable heuristic for where Tao should go because especially when those prices are being continuously and automatically shit tested by this initial allocation phase auto sell pressure, they mean something. So the market price in conjunction with this initial sell pressure and eventually with a lot of liquidity is a really good heuristic for, do people actually purchase this? Because if we don't have the auto sell pressure, one of the things that we knew could happen and would be happening right now is you get a registered subnet. That subnet would do what like 46, I think 46, I'm not sure, 43, one of those subnets, I think in the 40s is doing, where they basically, you're talking about miner burn, they're doing the opposite, right? So they just register all the keys, they run all the validators, they have all the stake, they just give all the emission to themselves, and they're collecting like they have like 2 million in the supply. So their hope, I suppose, is that they want to be able to get all the supply, and that we'll do afterwards is they'll pump the price up. And as they pump the price up, they'll be able to pull in Tao emission. And there's no shit testing. There's nobody that can sell the token that they don't have, right? Because there's only one entry point and they have all the supply. So Tao follows the price and we're shit out of luck and everyone else gets burned. That is not happening. It's actually quite incredible that nobody's doing that. It's working in that regard, right? So it costs you more to fake the price signal on Bittensor than you would get by trying to fake the price signal and through purchasing your own token. And I know people that have tried to do it in large amounts and try to do that, stake into their own subnets, buy their own tokens, try to keep the prices going so that they can get more Tao emission. It doesn't work out. You end up losing money. And that's a good sign. So we ensured with tau weight and root cell pressure that the thing was incentive compatible. Now, I know that it's an aspect that is kind of scary to people, but like people really need to understand like two qualities, right? So the APR on the subnets is very high initially in the low liquidity regime, and also the root prop is dropping. So like these things should be to an investor. I think they should really understand what that means. But anyways, Mark, you unmuted yourself, so I think you have something to say.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to follow up before I go. Look, I love a lot of the design that you guys have come up with. The more I explore things and I realize kind of the purpose of things and how the dynamic works, the way it defeats fuckery is awesome. And and just the idea that you guys launched this thing kind of flawlessly, like there was no bugs. I mean, it was unbelievable that you guys were able to do that. And I really have to take my hat off to you. And the more I explore the design, the more I admire it. And I would much rather be in this world where we, at the moment, have quote unquote depressed prices in subnets and dTao, but we don't have wildly appreciating, crazy Solana-like dynamics that in the short term would kill this thing in the crib. This is much more built for the long term. And I hear you when you say that the APY basically makes up for the dilution that we're all suffering inside of the subnets right now, quote unquote dilution / liquidity growth. So and I understand that dynamic and fully agree with it and applaud it. I do think that money, like we're still in this period where it's hard for new money to get in, and it's going to, but I think it is going to come. It's going to come from people like me doing hedge funds, so institutionals, and it's going to come from the consumer. The consumer piece of it's not here yet, but I think Sturdy is pretty close to launching, and I think their solution is quite good. Void has launched, but they have no liquidity, so it's it's an effect sort of bricked at the moment. But somewhere down the road, they might be able to figure that out. It looks like they're about 3 or 4 months away from actually having meaningful liquidity. But I think when either one of those universes is online, we'll see a different movie. And I think once new money can come in easily, that will sort of push things in a new direction. So that's it.
Yeah. So we have, by comparison, and I made a tweet about this today, we have 15 subnets or more, maybe 20 subnets on Bittensor right now that have, in their low point, which is today. It's not going to go much lower because of the price bottom, in my opinion. At their low point, we have like 15 to 20 subnets that are have like a higher valuation and a fully diluted valuation than Bittensor did at the same time, right? It takes time to build these markets. It takes time to build these economies. It takes time to build these cultures, and build these products. And we're only just beginning to see, subnets that are actually like self-sustainable. And like, that's incredible. Like what project in the entire ecosystem of crypto has any tokens on their chain that are near price, like a revenue positive, right? And we have a whole bunch. We have at least 5 that I can think of, right? Tau hash is pretty close. Infinite hash is pretty close. Celium is over the top. Targon incredibly close. Shoots is capturing incredible amounts of value. Like we have built a machine that actually, and so people might disagree with me, but I actually think the ordering and the structure of the subnets right now is pretty incredibly accurate. That's amazing. I think like that was our original goal. It's like, how do we rank the subnets? How do we put them in order in a way that is not governed by a small group of people, right? And we have that. So like, even if we don't have liquidity, as long as we have that sorting property, the prices are going to stay roughly around the sum of one. And we've actually achieved our game. But I don't think that's going to happen long term. So like, there's an aspect to this where it's like we're in kind of a checkpoint here. It feels like in the ecosystem and in dTao. And really, it's exciting to see where we're going to go from here. So, okay, so that was a great conversation about burns. Is there like questions in the Discord that we should like pull up? Yeah, Ash says, what can be done from the chain perspective to stop emissions going to subnets like Subnet 5? Okay, so this is a really interesting one. This is a really good question. People have been angry about this one, and my perspective on this might be different than some, and I actually don't think that what we're seeing right now with Subnet 5 is an example of anything really breaking. The price on Subnet 5 is being maintained by people that are purchasing it based on speculation. Speculation exists in any market. You cannot extract or remove speculation. If we say we're going to, the subnets that are being speculated on and are not actually producing the value should all be, they should all be dropped. Who's going to decide that? There is no way to separate future potential from current potential and current value. So like the latent team is building something behind the scenes and people know that. And so like there's a lot of like anger, I guess, towards the team because I think they're soaking up emissions because they don't deserve it and I deserve it and I'm building. And ultimately you're just kind of calling bullshit on the market. Like don't cry in the casino, kind of like it's not, people are purchasing or staking into those subnets at the valuation that they assume is behind that idea that is coming out of the team that's building it. And like, yeah, maybe this is actually a great example though for why root cell pressure is important, because Cato initially was much higher, but it's required that continuous investment on behalf of people that believe in that team to keep that price higher, as high it is right now. So I don't think it's necessarily a massive, it's not necessarily an example of a failure of dTao. But I might get my head cut off for that. I'm not trying to defend latent here. I think that ultimately, and like a number of people are out there that support them, have put their stake behind that team and believe in what they're building. That might be a good decision. That might not be a good decision. In the end, it'll be determined by the delivery of that team, and I'm sure they're pretty stressed out. Off with his head, Todd. Okay, so right. Can we limit burning emissions? Have a vesting mechanism for miners? Okay, it's a good question. So I've made it a number of times. Technically, the way that Bittensor works in Yuma Consensus is that the validators can set weights and they have as much control as they have in stake. Right now, the teams are using the burn miner, they're using the burn key. We built that key because we knew that teams were going to burn miner emissions, whether or not we liked it or not. So we said, hey, let's just build the feature directly so that it's transparent. Maybe it could be more transparent. Maybe it could be a hyperparameter of the subnets, but it's pretty transparent. You can see it on the chain. You can see it in the weights, right? It also makes it so that they can burn, dynamically based on the validators, and also it is the burn amount is determined by the validators who run the code. So, if these validators choose not to run the burn code does not run. We have no control over the flow of emission below the validators unless we were to go and somehow build some sort of mechanism to stop Yuma Consensus from running properly, which is not going to happen. And ultimately, people were just going to get around it. So there is no control over burn. If inside the subnets that the owners can't necessarily affect just by having the validators run the code. If we get rid of the burn key, people will just use other keys and it will be non-transparent. And then there's another problem because we can't reach social consensus about the thing in the first place. So I'm in favor of building tools on behalf of owners so that they can so that we can see transparently what is going on inside the subnets, and so that we can have social consensus about things. If you think that a subnet shouldn't be burning miner emissions, you don't have to stake into that. You don't have to mine into that subnet. You can build your own subnet, and you can also gather support from other stakers in that subnet to stake with you to change the burn emission. So that was investing mechanism for miners. I don't think is really required. So all of those types of crypto finagling, where you try to reduce the supply that's selling by forcing them to lock it for longer periods of time. At the end of the day, it doesn't change the average amount of sell pressure in your subnet. And so there's no way of stopping sell pressure by locking funds without actually just removing property rights from people. And so it never works. You just create a black swan event. And so things like vesting mechanisms don't work. No crying in the polytope. Okay. Yeah. What does? Okay. So let's talk deregistrations. Let's talk about subnet locks. Sorry, subnet limit. This is another really important one. I think it's a lot of people have been talking about this. So we know that the chain can support a lot more subnets on Bittensor, but in order to do that, we need to limit the amount of chain space they use. So if we were to get to say like 1,000 subnets or 2,000 subnets, we begin to require the chain to sort of like blacklist certain subnets in the speed at which they can run their tempo. But that's not why we limited the number of subnets. What we wanted to do actually was just take a checkpoint and reduce a little bit of the chaos and the complexity of dTao last month, so that people could build some consensus around the way that the thing was working. And there wasn't just like this exploding fat tail of subnets coming in every day where a lot of them were not active. So we hope that we could actually force them to be more active. Subnets, then what happened as a consequence is that people started to buy subnets, and this became sort of a meta, was waiting for cold key swaps, which is actually not something that we really expected to happen, but and that created the new meta, like, hey, this subnet has been sold, I'm going to purchase the token early on, and we got a bit of like a degeneracy in the market with people trying to play that game. So now that we've seen some of the consequences of limiting the slots, that there's two sides of the debate, right? So like let's expand, right, or let's keep the limit. And we used to have limits, right? So it used to be, the original was 32 subnets, then we went to 40 subnets, then we went to 44 subnets, up to 50, and then finally 60 and 64. We got to 64 subnets before dTao launched. And when we increased the number of subnets, we actually did see more sophistication and more performance in those subnets as they got filtered out. But because there's no deregistration, that filtration process is not really occurring. And instead, we're just getting sort of concentration around the subnet slots, and you're getting this type of so gaming and manipulation aspect to the cold key swaps. We would love to deregister some subnets on Bittensor, but there are some important things about running a cryptocurrency as we do, and one of them is that like property rights are very, very serious in cryptosphere. It is actually functionally possible for us to upgrade the chain and to change token balances. For instance, like we can do that. We still have the mechanisms. Polkadot chains allow us to do upgrades. But we would never do that. And there's somewhat of an equivalence between the relationship between tokens on people's ledgers and subnet slots on the chain. So I think that it's important to protect that. People have registered subnets. We cannot remove them. We cannot remove their tokens. And so we're, I wish I had a better answer for people who are here, but I don't think we have fully figured out what we're going to do in this regard. But one of our plans is actually to cycle cycle the slots themselves, but to keep the tokens as fixed. So like there's no like liquidation event or anything like that. Ultimately, we could also just increase the slots and we can see how the mechanism works. And I think both would be possible and work out pretty fine.
Okay. So Jake. So just to play devil's advocate, and I think Ref was flirting with this idea. The slots is property rights, but not the alpha emissions. So. Oh, no, sorry, not the Tau emissions. So maybe drain the Tau emissions and,
Well, this already happens. This already happens already, right? So there is no right to Tau emissions in dynamic Tau and Bittensor, right? Like, and that sorting process occurs naturally through the market, right? So dTao works, right? I think that we can definitely increase the number of slots, and there's a lot of people calling for it, and so I think that we'll probably have a decision on that pretty soon. I don't have much more to say on that point, other than like there's what we're thinking about more than anything is just like, how do we make sure that we don't transgress what has been previously agreed to on behalf of the community when it came to their slots. Like, we think that's super important, and obviously we don't do things that are not like in favor of like that people would be surprised if we did, and people lose money as a consequence, right? So we can't, there are limitations, and so like we can increase slots right now, and we would do that if we thought that it was the right time. Yeah. Okay.
What about so I was going through the bits recently, and I thought I was keeping track of everything that's happening in Church of Rao, but there's especially given this whole emission situation, there's been a lot of bits that have been open, PR'd, and closed. So can you talk to some of them, like the proportional burn? Why did that get canned? The locks V1, because in Church of Rao, when we were all arguing, you said that, you dropped locks in one of the threads, and people are thinking, oh yeah, let's do locks. So could you shed light on why those bits were cancelled, or what are why they need to be tabled?
Yeah, so why they're so tabled, they're not canceled so much. The original version of Dynamic Tau had lock-based control of subnets, which means that the owner key wasn't the person that registered the subnet, but it's actually the person inside of the subnet that had locked their funds for the longest amount of time, according to an equation called conviction. And we spoke about this on one of the early calls just before the launch, and there was a lot of pushback from owners, and they basically said, hey, look, like that adds too much complexity for us, especially early on, which is totally fair, right? Like I'm really in favor of slow and incremental decentralization of Bittensor, right? So we have, right now we're building out the ability for Bittensor's blockchain to actually be proof of stake, right? It was not a requirement for us to have that in the first year of our life. It is now becoming more and more of a requirement. It's something that we're pushing, incredibly fast. Originally, the pseudo key was just one key. There was no concept of a triumvirate. There was no concept of the multi-sig. There was no concept of the Senate. There was no concept of like the incremental change in the governmental control and design of Bittensor. I think that subnets should have the same ability to have that slow process, right? So that's why something like that is shelved, because we're thinking about this project in terms of decades, and I hope that subnet owners are also thinking that time frame, right? Rome was not built in a day. Bitcoin itself really only started to become real and achieve its aims after 5, 6, 7 years, 8 years. Right, we're 15 years in now. It's becoming really the line that it is. The same kind of thing with what we're building from a technological standpoint. Like, we are building a full stack AI network capable of competing with centralized counterpart. That's crazy, right? We have to figure out how to do decentralized training. And if you're thinking distributed, like, okay, hey, how do I use a compression algorithm, dloco plus new distro, and then we're going to do async. Like, if you're thinking about that while you're worried about people overthrowing your subnet with a lock, I think that just really slows down innovation and actually doesn't take us in the direction that we need to go, right? So it gets a little bit too philosophical. It's like too ideological as opposed to practical. But we're balancing both those things, right? So we want to take the subnets towards full decentralization in token ownership. The way that we think we can do it is with locks. So basically, if you're a party that locks the most amount of funds, you get more control over some of the hyperparameters of the subnet, and you can actually overtake or take over a subnet if that subnet is not being maintained by the owner. So there is actually ability to sort of wrestle control out of the subnet owners hands if you have more conviction in what's being built and you have the tokens to showcase that, right? So that's the general idea. So the question is like, why be slow? Why be careful, I think, is a better question, because that's what we're doing. Right? We're being careful. We're thinking long term. We're thinking, hey, we want to be here in 5, 10, 15 years. Rome was not built in a day. How do we make functioning democracy, truly functioning ecology of society where people can vote and there's conviction and people care and people have stake and there's a good community and there's a good conversation. We have the mechanism of that conversation. That takes, it took society thousands and thousands of years before we could build models. And so these things don't just get spun up in a second, especially when we're inventing them inside of a different jurisdiction, a different environment than anything that's been done before. And in almost every single crypto governmental system, take Polkadot as an example, has failed. It really does not work because you need to have a lot of really aligned participants that know how the technology works, that can contribute, and that there's a forum for conversation to occur. So like, there's one of the reasons why we didn't launch on Polkadot, right? Was because we needed to get a bit flipped for Bittensor in order to launch on Polkadot. And they told us it was going to be 6 months before something like that could change. That is not the kind of speed that we want to move at when we're building like really well-functioning AI systems on Bittensor, like Templar. So that's why something like that is being pinned for now. And we're going to follow the pushback from the community, right? As people want these kind of things, we're going to implement them. We're going to use that as signal, I think, that drives the way an OTF moves.
Sorry, you touched on something very important and something that I think you haven't driven home. It's the alignment, because again, I don't think subnets are aligned, and so there's two things here. Very, very different expectations. And take, for example, you say these things take years to build. Now, from a subnet owner, I'm thinking, fuck, like, I need time. You understand? But I made the mistake of, I'm sorry, not the mistake. I bought some Gamma, just a little bit, a couple of days ago, and I'm down 25%. Then I feel the holders' anxiety, yeah, because okay, yeah, we're meant to be patient, yeah, but where we are now, is it that the price? So if I was a holder, how would you advise? What would you advise me to do? Should I ape Aphine? Should I? What is the play now?
I said this in the day that we launched dTao. Go slow. Allocate slowly. This is a novel mechanism. We built it to take time. Yes, right. So we were potentially way overpriced in dTao. It's hard to say. I think, if you believe in the market as being the ultimate arbiter of whether or not things are priced properly, then yeah, we were overpriced. What I would say to people is like, yeah, be careful, but also think about projects that are built by teams that really care and are putting their reputation and their ideas and their really their life behind it. So like, I would invest in myself. Because if you'd met me 10 years ago, you would have known I would never given up. I was going to build this thing. I wanted to build something. And that's who I would be staking with and that's who I do stake with in Bittensor, which is actually a lot of the teams here. There's a lot of the teams here really care about what they're building, and are here for the long haul, and really want to make these things work. So like, if you're betting on a horse like that, this is not financial advice. If you're betting on a horse like that, you can sit easy, you can sleep easy, because that person is that horse, right, is charging for you. They're going to make it happen. So yeah, I mean, like, I can't. You're kind of like saying like, oh yeah, you meet somebody in the street that's bleeding out, like they just lost like 2 quarts of blood. Like, what do you say to them? Like, don't worry about it. Yeah, yeah, don't worry about it. like one of the important things that we're actually recognizing now in dTao is really important for people to realize is that like Bittensor dTao works. It kind of fights you on the way up, but it also protects you on the way down. And it's meant to stabilize the network organically, or like mechanistically, pardon me, not organically. So I won't say any more on that.
Hey, can hear me okay? All right.
Yes, I can.
Just have a few good points I wanted to make. I thought they were good, but first one would be the there's new SEC regs coming out. I know there's a tweet today about that. And they say they allow ICOs and airdrops, and also the market structure bill that might become a thing later this year. In addition to that, there's the state-based AI policy with the latest bill. So I mean, there's a lot of like regulation and laws coming up. This is all U.S. by the way, of course, if you didn't know. But I'm just wondering if anybody in OTF is watching that and kind of game planning around that, how they're designed, how the protocol design can change.
Well, it's funny because the regulators are always making the things that are bad for people legal first. Like when we first launched in 2021, we were talking to lawyers and we were like, hey, look, we're just going to do it so that you can mine the token. And like, there's no pre-mine, And they were like, oh, no, don't do that. Like the regulation says that you should probably just, do an insider fund raise with only accredited investors and give away the whole token supply. So I don't follow what the regulators say because they never work in the interest of individuals. But we have an argument to make that with the way that we build our technology is really imbued with the right ideals, and we don't do things that are illegal, right? And we have a strong argument for that. But yes, of course we follow this, and I just don't think it's really good signal. I'm going to be the last person that's going to be in favor of asking the federal government like how to build protocol designs. Okay, cool. T-Slice, you're up on stage.
Hello. Yes. I figure maybe we can just well, first off, I'll say Church of Rao, shout out for that. Everyone in the audience, Church of Rao is a separate Discord. You might have to find it, but something that Reef and I have been talking about there is that, and it's showing through in this conversation, this presentation today, is this ecosystem is as strong as its participation. And I know that sounds hokey, but it's true. And so I just wanted to put out an invite for people. There's an open dev call every week on Tuesday, 10 a.m. Pacific. And that's when people get into verbal conversations around these upgrades that are coming. And then there's all the channels in the Discord where you can participate in the conversation. If you go there, you'll see there's lots of other people sharing their opinion. And really what we're hearing today, like from UConns, is partially a product of all that, right? All those discussions, all that swarm intelligence brewing that has got us here, right? So plug for COR. And secondly, I guess I'll just ask a question, and maybe you can clear it up if these two things are unrelated. But did you guys take a look at when you stopped the new subnet registration? Did that have an impact on reducing root prop or stopping its growth? I was just wondering if, because
no, those things are not related.
Okay, because it's proportional, right, to the emission effectively out of the 100 kind of thing is what ends up.
Well, that in nature, right, things tend to follow Pareto distributions, right? And the distribution over the subnets hasn't really changed, even though we put a cap. But you would imagine, though, that if you put a cap, that it became a little bit less skewed. So the Pareto distribution would be kind of like pulled up at the bottom. But because it's actually sufficiently large, like on 128, it's like a lot. for like the size of community and the size of chain and like the limitations of our ability to even really deal with 128 different fucking incentivized decentralized networks at the same time. It's a pretty big number. We could go bigger, but I don't like to a certain degree. I don't think that we even need more complexity, but we do, because right now there's teams that are saying like, hey, we want to launch our own subnets. We want to start from zero. So like that's the biggest reason. It's like from my perspective, like that's the biggest reason. We want it to be possible to start a new token on Bittensor and not have anybody in your way and not have any of these limitations.
Yeah, I see that as like the main reason why we need new subnet registration available for the growth of the ecosystem, right? People go, okay, well, there aren't working ones yet. Yes, but I know people in chats that are like, fuck, I was gonna get one. I've been working on an idea, and they can't right now.
They don't want to buy one. Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And also as someone that just bought a subnet, it doesn't feel, I don't know, maybe it's hubris. It certainly doesn't feel like there's something that's missing from when you start from scratch. I don't know. I can't describe it. Like, it's just, I think, especially when it comes to building a community and sharing that kind of social cohesion, that I wouldn't, if I had to do it again, I wouldn't buy a subnet. I'll just suffer a prop. Because you suffer together, you cry together, you build a strong community.
Yeah, exactly. The right way. I'm totally on that team. Okay, so any more questions? We bring up people from the stage. If you have questions to ask about like these topics, like I hope we've covered a lot of it. I'm kind of spitballing about some of the ideas here, and but like there's a lot here. Any other questions from the Discord? I'm just following that.
If I may, I just want to say something. Discord, a distributed tensor. I don't know why I'm using your full name. DT said earlier was that in these discussions, it's really important that we try and understand from other people's points of view, to the point that we like really think of it exclusively from their point of view for a moment, at the very least. And as a subnet owner, for example, the idea that when I was hearing, oh, there's a way somebody can take a subnet, as a new subnet owner myself, it's not active, but I'm like, oh, that's something that can happen. I better make sure that doesn't happen to my subnet. And then there's this idea of decentralized subnets coming, this kind of thing, which is all very interesting. But the other perspective that we need to bear in mind, other than just listening to each other, which is hard enough, is the perspective of people outside of the space and newcomers. Like Mark touched on that a bit too. I can't remember if David mentioned it, but like, builders coming in, is it too scary to buy a subnet? If we make the subnet really competitive to like have really good things, are we making it too scary, or are we actually just surfacing like the people with most conviction out there? But is that too thin? And same thing with the alpha price and this kind of stuff. How do we make sure that the choices we're making when we're upgrading the chain and stuff like that support what those people want, what those people might find interesting? But again, we don't want to cater to the mob or cater to people who don't have conviction or aren't already, that haven't shown their interest, right? They're bystanders at this point. But you get what I mean. Maybe.
Yes. There's a lot there. There's a lot there. And it's fully a whole other conversation to talk about that particular thing. And so we're over the call. It was an hour long.
Wait, no. Cause nope, you're not getting off the hook. What is Aphine? Literally, we've waited for it for so fucking long. Yeah. What is Aphine? Like, and how long do we have to keep our emissions before you take it up?
I think we got extra time for that. Let's hear it.
Yeah, okay, great. So when I first got into building Bittensor, I had a lot of hubris in thinking that we could just beat Google, right, with a decentralized network where we would query miners and they would return AGI. And like the real trajectory for Bittensor has been longer and way more interesting, and also much more sophisticated. If you think about the way in which Bittensor is evolving, and you can look at it just playing out before us right now, is that what we're doing is we're building individual layers of the technological stack and progressively adding them on top of each other. The lowest level of that stack, I think, is sort of like Bitcoin mining, hashing kind of thing. Just above that is just raw compute, right? Like bare metal compute. We didn't have that on Bittensor. And we have like 3 or 4 compute. You're building one, Fish is building one, Neural Internet is building one, Targon is building one. And we've sort of like begun to perfect these like more clear, close to the metal, rubber hits the road, digital commodities, where it's very clear. Okay, there's money in, compute out, cycles in, cycles, money in, cycles out. Then on top of that, we're really building layers, things like pre-training, which take compute and push them through. Take that compute and use it to train large-scale machine learning models. But that's not the full stack. If we want to get to, Chat GPT level, your grandma uses Bittensor, poking ourselves into the real world where there's like, people don't even know they don't even know that they're interacting with something that is on a decentralized rails, and it is valuable to everybody across the globe. We're being used by poor children in India. And they don't even need to know about it, right? Like that's not compute, that's not hashes, that's not pre-training. And above pre-training, we have we need to RL fine tune those models, and then above RL fine tune, we need to above RL reinforcement learning training, we need to do fine tuning, and above fine tuning, we need to do inferences, and above inferences, we need to do faster inferences, and then above that, we need to have something that collocates it and connects it all together, right? So my goal with Aphine is to build a subnet in Bittensor that integrates with every layer of its stack, that tries to pull all of Bittensor together to make that final connective, that final pimple, that final poke into the most important aspect, which is like building pinnacle intelligence. We have compute, we have pre-training, we're going to have RL fine-tuning, we're going to have normal fine-tuning on gradients, we have inferences on shoots and target and on 19. All of these stacks we've needed to build them all. And they're progressively becoming incredibly efficient, and they work really well. It's now, I think, time for us to focus on that what is that final thing? What's that like pinnacle intelligence thing? How do we define it? And our idea, and it really is experimental, like guys, like there's a lot of pressure on me because of who I am in Bittensor, but like I really believe in what we're building here. The idea is to build that final incentive layer that uses a set of environments and forces us to RL fine tune models that are better at coding and mathematics and the language they use, and the ability to use MCPs and do deep research and these things that have been, really like the final pinnacle, highest level commodity that we can build on Bittensor. It's going to take some time. So like, give us some time on that subnet, but that's what we're building. We built it so that it's very easy to plug and play a variety of different RL environments, so that we can fine tune these models and make them better and better at what we want them to be good at. So we can say, hey, look, we need models to be better at Sweetbench, and that can be plugged into ridges as an example, right? So Aphine is built on top of shoots, right? So we use shoots as an inference layer, which is a unique thing in Bittensor. It's the first time probably a subnet, except maybe I think ridges actually, is like fully integrated with another subnet. We're going to try to integrate it with gradients so that people can easily throw up miners, have gradients, fine-tune models that perform better inside of Aphine. And we basically push the Pareto frontier of these models according to a set of environments that is defined by the validators. Benefit here is that it's totally transparent. We can see how well we perform. We can push things daily, and people can understand the incentives which determine the intelligence that they're using. Really nice feature of Aphine, because we're building on Bittensor, and this is exciting for us, is that we can just build a perfectly well-functioning front end that just uses the models that we're training, because we just have shoots in the back end. So we're going to try to integrate shoots back end. Then for the models that are top of the network, we're going to actually integrate them with 19 and Targon, so that we boost the tokens per second, and we can build these incredibly performant machine learning systems that actually reach into the sphere, right? So that somebody out there in the middle of Uganda can open their phone and use a front end that is as performant as the best technologies built by the best labs in the world, and they'd have no idea that that model is hosted on decentralized infrastructure, was trained inside of a decentralized infrastructure, which came from a model was all fine-tuned in a decentralized infrastructure, which came from a model that was pre-trained, which came from compute, which was crowdsourced on something like Liam or Basilica. So that's where I'm trying to situate the subnet. I think it's the most ethical place for me to put it, as somebody in the position I am. It should be something that's built to integrate with a bunch of different things on Bittensor, and that's what ultimately we're trying to do. So anyways, wish us luck.
When revenue?
170 billion. You got me. Cool, guys. All right. Well, this has been fantastic. I think we should do novel research like this. We're going to try to figure out how we can structure it so that people can stream their slides, and we can have it more in the open. We get more people here, and people can see what we're doing. It's not just underground. Yeah, guys. Thanks, everyone.
What we missed on this is we missed the chat. So we need to go chat on Discord. So okay, let's have chat next time. Thanks a lot, Cons.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.